The first question which a lot of people ask is the Indian media running crazy? Are they doing stupid things? Are they crossing the line? Do they need to be reined in? So I'll start with self-regulation, explaining to all of you how the media is trying to regulate so that you understand better what's going on internally and then decide for yourself whether it's working adequately or not. There are two big bodies that are involved in the process of regulation. One is the News Broadcasting Standards Authority, which has been set up by the News Broadcasting Association, and then there is the Broadcast Editors Association. The News Broadcasting Standards Authority is run by Justice J.S. Verma. There are people like Nitin Desai, Chokela Iyer, Deepankar Gupta, S.Y. Qureshi, the former Chief Election Commissioner, and there are 3 editors. I happen to be one of the members of the authority. Now, this authority takes up complaints by viewers. So if you watch something on TV which you don't like, and you wish to complain to Justice Verma about it, you put in your complaint, the authority then calls the channel, calls the complainant, there's a public hearing, and then on the back of that, a verdict, an order is given, and then the channel must comply with that order. Sometimes they have to pay a fine going up to 1 lakh rupees. Sometimes they have to put out an apology on air, say we're sorry for what happened. And in my opinion, this is having a massive deterrent impact. Just last week, for example, one of the biggest networks lost a case and they had to put out an apology. They had to pay 1 lakh rupees. And that, the moment that happens to one editor, everybody in the newsroom gets very, very careful, and they ensure that they don't at least make the same mistake, and they're very careful about ensuring that they don't make similar mistakes either. The other body that's working on self-regulation is the Broadcast Editors Association. This is a body of peers where all the editors work together. They're emailing each other, they're calling each other, they're SMSing each other almost on a daily basis and taking dynamic calls on volatile situations. For example, when you had riots in Mumbai very recently, or there were riots in Uttar Pradesh, or people were burning themselves, you would have seen over the recent months that such images haven't gone on air, and TV has been far more circumspect post 26/11. So I'm not saying that everything's hunky-dory or they were great to begin with, but post 26/11 there's far more realization about the need to be careful and about the consequences of somebody's actions. For example, when in Bangalore there were these MMSs and SMSs being circulated which had people just flocking to the northeast, television coverage was rather restrained. Is it restrained enough is something we can debate and argue about, but it was far more restrained than it was in the past. So that's how the BEA and the NBSA are functioning. The government, of course, doesn't like it. They'd like the public discourse to be far tamer, far calmer, far more nuanced. Basically, they don't want bad things to come out. And if you see over the last several months, the media has come out with one expose after the other, which has deeply tarnished the image of this government. And as a consequence, it's pinching, and they want to come back with some form of government-mandated regulation. I believe as a journalist that that is deeply dangerous because the government is not really looking to regulate you. They're trying to control you like they did during the emergency. They would love to do that again. And as all free-thinking people, as a journalist, I believe that we must do what we can to ensure that the government doesn't succeed in its mission, and that requires a certain amount of care on all our parts to ensure that we don't do stupid things, that we don't put things out which can't be justified, which are completely crazy, which lead to riots. TV channels need to be careful. So is regulation working or not? Well, who are the channels who are part of the NBSA or the BEA? It's channels like Headlines Today, Aaj Tak, CNN IBN, NDTV, Times Now, ABP News. These are the more mainstream channels, and by their very nature, because of the fact that they come from groups with strong journalistic pedigree, they are more careful. It is the second rung and the third rung channels, I don't want to take names, which are not careful, and they're not even in the purview of the NBSA. The NBSA and the BEA are purely voluntary bodies where you decide whether you wish to be a part of them or not, and if you decide you don't want to be a part of them, then you can't be a part of them. So that's a problem, because these channels then show all sorts of things, and some of the complaints when viewers have put out an application against a particular channel, I've seen some crazy things. A news channel showing lovemaking at 9 p.m. in prime time, voyeurism of the worst nature. Now that's not news, and somewhere that needs to be clamped down on. So what's the solution? We've been engaging government, whether it's Manish Tiwari now, Ambika Soni previously, and saying that a mechanism must be found as part of the licensing norms to ensure that all channels come under the purview of the NBSA, that it shouldn't be a voluntary exercise, that the NBSA is an autonomous body, it has nothing to do with the government. And Justice Verma, given the sort of reputation he carries, is a very famous jurist. The government dare not mess with him. So you can't have an INB minister saying, oh, I didn't like that story on so-and-so channel, so Justice Verma, can you fix them? I mean, till the time Justice Verma is around and the other people that I mentioned, you know that that's not going to happen. So I think that is the solution to this problem of regulation, that it's some of the unregulated channels who are not part of any of the peer bodies who are doing crazy things. They need to be reined in for sure. There were some complaints against some channels. They left the BEA, they left the NBSA because there were some verdicts that went against them. Now that's not okay. If something's gone against you, you have to comply, you have to say sorry, you have to pay the fine if that's what's required, and move on and learn the lessons. I think that's what we need to work on when it comes to regulation. The other thing that Dilip wanted me to speak about was about media credibility and ethics, especially at a time when journalists are beating their chests and saying, see what this fellow is doing, see what that fellow is doing, and suddenly it turns out that in a reverse sting operation, journalists are caught with their hands in the tail. Now that's deeply disturbing. So what do we make of it? The way that the industry perceives this is that media is just reflecting society. We're not saying we're perfect, and we're not perfect, and it takes all sorts to make journalists. There are all sorts of people who are politicians. To suggest that all politicians are corrupt is incorrect. To suggest that all PR agents are handing out money is incorrect. And therefore, to suggest that all journalists are corrupt is incorrect too. For example, when the Z Jindal case came up, immediate action was taken. The BEA, that's the Broadcast Editors Association, took sumo to notice of this. Z was called in, their editors came and represented. The Jindals came in, they represented. I was part of a 3-member fact-finding committee that analyzed the tapes, heard both parties out, and came out with an order. And we terminated the membership of one of the editors of that news channel. And the action was immediate. It happened in less than a week. The police haven't yet even filed an FIR or have done very much, right? So if you allow the system to take its own course, nothing's going to happen. But as journalists, we were keen on ensuring that a message goes out that if somebody steps out of line, action will be taken against him. And that's what was done, because you might think that it doesn't have much of an impact. I mean, 20 editors getting together, terminating somebody's membership of BEA, doesn't really mean very much. But it's a huge slap across your face from a peer body, and it impacts also possibly your future employment possibilities, and therefore it is a massive deterrent. In fact, subsequent to what happened with Z and Jindal, there's been a lot of introspection in various newsrooms where increasingly, because of marketing, because of sales, there was a lot of synergy and integration happening, and the lines were getting blurred at some level. Now very clearly, because of what's happened, first with the Barkhawi, Raja Radia tapes, and now editors are turning around and telling managements that, we're not going to do that, or this is not okay. So at some level, it has led to a process of self-correction and self-realization on the behalf of managements too, that earlier, it's only about, for example, getting a few extra crores from doing a deal, so why run this story? But now, people are far more careful because they've realized the consequences of allowing that line to blur. And that's a big change that is taking place internally. So there's a certain amount of self-correction that's happening. But there are some lessons to be learned from what happened with Z Jindal, with Barkhavi, Raja Radia, etc. And what we're seeing with Arvind Kejriwal, flung all sorts of mark against the likes of Ambanis, against the Burmans, against the Birlas. All sorts of people are now being, accused of all sorts of things, some of which they might have done, some of which they might not have done. But what has happened is that we're witnessing what I believe is a public accountability revolution in our country. And the reason I say it is that many of you sitting here, the seniors, have spent large parts of your career managing the environment. Now that involves various things, primarily involving reaching out to journalists, speaking to them, trying to see what you could do on behalf of your clients, or putting forth your client's perspective, which is a perfectly bona fide thing for somebody in the corporate communications PR field to do. However, now, there isn't just pressure from above, there is pressure from below. Earlier, the Prime Minister or his press aide could call up the 10 top newspaper editors of the country and say, here's something which is sensitive with India, with China, whatever you might deem to be sensitive. Can your paper not publish it? And if the editors agreed, voila, there was a code of omerta, nothing got carried, nobody knew, because information was a one-way street. That secret club now stands smashed, because now information is not a one-way street, it's a 360-degree crazy street where everything is cutting into each other. And now there isn't just the pressure from, say, a corporate house or a top politician about the way in which a story should be presented. There is pressure from below through social media, for example, where now, let me, since some of this is being recorded, I won't take names, okay? But very recently, there were some allegations being flung by a civil rights anti-corruption crusader whom we all know, but we don't want to name, against a big media, against a big channel, which was owned by a corporate house. Ordinarily, I would have assumed that that media organization would be very wary about the way in which that story would be carried, which is legitimate because these allegations that have been leveled against people who have a stake in your company. But because of pressure from below, that channel actually covered that story far more than they would have earlier. So they went and got people from the organization to give their defense. They got critics to come out and speak against the organization which had a stake in their organization. And that, I believe, is a fabulous development. This is great because for too long, things have been managed. I mean, it's bad for PR people, of course, because it makes your life that much tougher. But it's fabulous as a country which seeks to know the truth, because you can't any longer manage the environment. I mean, the environment is dynamic and it's going to come and hit you in the face and hit you really hard, and you have to figure out what to do to deal with it, but you can't manage it. And I think that is very, very interesting. It's a dynamic that is still unfolding, but it's very interesting. And I think to a great part, it's caused by someone like an Arvind Kejriwal, who comes from outside the system, who's got no stakes in the system. You know, he's not got friends. He's trying to make a mark. He is putting out some stuff which is untrue. And I accept the fact that some of the things he's saying is untrue. But because of the fact that he's come out and put this out, for example, let's take what happened with Robert Vadra. The fact that so many stories and so many investigations were carried out against Robert Vadra and are still being carried out against Robert Vadra is a sign of the times. And if Robert Vadra's PR managers can't manage his PR, then imagine what a challenge you have for all your clients, right? So I think in that sense, the fabric is changing. And I, as a journalist, am very happy that people who've been around for much longer, who were part of the same fabric. You know, Delhi has this process of socialization. Everybody meets, everybody's at parties, they kiss each other, and they're very happy, they hug each other, and then they basically don't say anything against each other. I think that's terrible, and I think that ought to change. For very long, this code of omerta has existed, and it ought to change, and the fact that we're taking steps in that direction are fabulous. And I also know, as a journalist saying these things, that the standards of accountability to which I will be held, similarly, the standards of accountability to which all of you will be held, are far higher than the standards of accountability in the past. There were several things that several people in journalism, in politics, in corporate India have done which are no longer acceptable. And I want to give you a very small example. Milind Deora was performing at Blue Frog a few weeks ago, and Rahul Gandhi and everybody was there essentially. At 10:30, and he was performing, and 10:25 Rahul walked in, and at 10:30, his time was up because there was an international DJ who had to perform at Blue Frog. And the DJ went up to Milind and said, "I'm sorry, your time is up, now it's my gig, please move on." And we were all shocked because we hadn't come to see this international DJ, we'd come to see Milind Deora perform. And because of the environment currently, Milind and everybody else were so petrified that if they were to extend the deadline by a few minutes, it could go against them. He left his guitar, he packed up and said, "Okay, international DJ, here you go, the stage is yours." That would have never happened earlier. Because, tu janta hai main kaun hu? Tu janta hai main kisko janta hu? Is a part of Indian culture and is definitely a part of Delhi's culture. The fact that you know people used to be really cool and you could get away with it. Now, if you know people, you are that much more careful to ensure that nobody finds out you know people, because this is what I call the revenge of the mango man. Robert Vadra brought this out into the public discourse, that, mango people in a banana republic. This is the revenge of the mango man, because for very long, the mango man has been silent. Things have been managed around him. And he hasn't had much of an option in the way things turn out. And he always felt cheated. I think what social media, more than anything else, has done, has given him a voice. He can now reach out to the top politicians, top people in corporate communications. People like Anand Mahindra are on Twitter, active themselves. And if something goes wrong, he can complain directly to Mr. Mahindra. I went to XYZ showroom and your service wasn't good. Lola, the chairman is ordering an investigation and that's not good. So people realize they have to be on their toes. There's this example from a corporate communications. There was this one company which was doing a CSR video. And my wife told me about it, in fact. And they were working on this, and they had some bodyguards just taking care of the turf and ensuring that the video could be shot. And some locals wanted to come in and obviously meet the stars, etc. And just meet with the stars, and that was obviously disturbing the production of the shoot. Now, because the bodyguards got into a scuffle with people on the ground, somebody posted that on Facebook, and somebody posted that on the main page of that particular company's international web page. Now, so each time you go check out that big electronics giant, on their web page is that, look at this dramatic video where somebody just wanted to meet somebody being beaten up by bodyguards. What a heartless company this is. Now, these sort of things are a corporate communications nightmare. And earlier, for example, in all newspapers, it used to say at a 5-star hotel in Delhi, because the Delhi hotel would put so much pressure on everybody. Don't name us, we've got nothing to do with it. Somebody fell off the 10th floor, what can we do? Things like that. And therefore, they'd, reach out to all the editors, the journalists, and say, don't mention us, cover the story. Now, you can't suppress anything. You don't need to wait to know what Rahul Kanwal or Headlines Today or NDTV or Times Now thinks about it. Somebody will post it on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, and it might go viral. So you, as an industry, have to figure out how to deal with that challenge. But you can't suppress facts. And I think that's fabulous, because it's fabulous to the extent that this whole business of managing the environment ends. You must be accountable for what you do. You must know that every action of yours will and can be scrutinized, and if you're out of line, you will be hauled up. And I think that happened with some very famous journalists who probably went out of line, were hauled up, they realized what they did. But just in their defense, if I could also say that journalists, when somebody from Copcom or PR calls me, if I've known him for very long, he says, "Acha, cabinet reshuffle mein kya ho raha hai? Anand Sharma kahan ja raha hai? Chidambaram kahan ja raha hai?" And I'm also happily telling him that this could happen, this could happen. I think people also realize that that is probably out of line. That everything you say can and probably will be held against you. So you need to measure what you're going to say that much more carefully. And this whole business of stringing along people. Now, for example, if you need to interview somebody who's in the midst of and you're trying to it for you. The game has changed for the good. But there is a flip side to this social media revolution, and that again is a massive challenge for all people in PR and in Copcom. That is that all of what is coming out isn't necessarily the truth. There are a lot of what is being, let's take for example, Kejriwal's charges against the 700 people who own accounts internationally. Now, I own an account in Barclays in London. There's nothing wrong in having an account. I mean, there's a different matter that it has 2.5 quids. That's what was left over from my scholarship when I was studying in the UK. But just to say that, this guy has an account internationally and therefore it must be black money and therefore the guy must be hung is crazy. Some of these accounts might be bona fide accounts and might be shown in their books. Taxes might have been paid. But the Mango Man doesn't necessarily understand this. Because he's been made to believe that, these big corporate houses are ruining India. It's, they're the ones who run India, not the Prime Minister. He tends to believe these things. So there is a crisis of credibility for the entire system. For our politicians, for government, for corporate India, for journalists, as much as there is for everybody else in the public space, a crisis of credibility, that they must re-establish their credibility, that people must believe that what is being said to them is correct, because if they don't, they're in trouble. Because earlier, if a story didn't suit someone, they could just omit it. If, let's not take names of papers, but if something didn't fit into my worldview, I don't need to put it out. But now, if you don't put it out, there's pressure from below. Why didn't that newspaper have this story? Why did they not do it? Media crooks, big guy. You must have seen all of this if all of you are on Twitter. Media crooks, media dalal, they'll chase you and they'll hunt you down. And therefore, there's that much more pressure from below, which is great that papers are careful. That they will put that story out as they should and cover it. The other thing that I was asked to speak about was about whether the Indian media will one day be openly partisan. Shivraj said, well, aren't they already? We've seen what happens with Fox and MSNBC in the United States, where Fox is heavily Republican and MSNBC is hugely liberal and pro-Democrat. Is that happening in India? I'd like to speak from my own experience and say no, I don't think so. For example, and I'm speaking here mostly for the India Today group, I believe that we try and be as aggressive against both sides of the political discourse, whether it's the BJP. I mean, we've had our office vandalized by goons from the Sangh. We've been attacked by the government very often, most recently at a very dramatic press conference. So we've actually been attacked by both formations, and that's all right. That's the way our group likes to play it, that if we're putting out a story and somebody doesn't like it, too bad. But I think each organization must choose for itself. I think India doesn't have the tradition of newspapers leaning in on any one party openly. And there might be a subtle bias, a management bias, editor's bias. There might be all of that. But they don't do so openly. They don't say, okay, we believe in the 2014 elections, Narendra Modi should be prime minister or Rahul Gandhi should be prime minister. They're not so blatant about it. And I think that is part of Indian culture, and I hope we can preserve it. Now, we saw what happened in Fox with Bill O'Reilly and Hannity and the others come out, and they just completely changed the equation. So they were so pro-Republican that they forced MSNBC, etc., who were searching for an identity to become pro-liberal so that they had at least some space of their own. I hope that doesn't happen. That makes me deeply uncomfortable. I know that there are some channels, which I won't name, which are very pro, say, the BJP, that if there's a story against Narendra Modi, they want to ask the nation all sorts of questions every night, but if there's something about Narendra Modi, they won't touch it. Because, oh, he's the Hindutva mascot and he mustn't ever be targeted. He's the man who will take our country forward. And they'll keep beating up everybody else. They'll beat the poor prime minister, they'll beat Mrs. Gandhi. But if it's Modi, they won't touch it. And similarly, there are some other organizations which are heavily tilting towards, say, the Congress. But I believe that it isn't as blatant as it is in the United States. And I hope it never gets, because at the core of journalism is our duty to be fair, responsible, balanced. Not fair and balanced as the way Fox means it, but fair and balanced in a genuine way, right? And I hope that we can retain that ethos. So I shouldn't go on and on. I should probably stop, and if there's some questions, we can chat.